Welcome back, everyone, to Health Hacks. This is our fourth deep dive, and today, wow, we're really going on a journey. We're looking at the evolution of human diets.
It's a huge topic, isn't it? Spanning, well, basically all of human history.
Exactly. We've dug into a lot of sources, scientific papers, historical accounts, nutritional studies, you name it. We want to figure out how our eating has changed, from way back in prehistoric times right up to today.
And the goal really is to pull out the key lessons, right? What can these massive shifts tell us about our health now?
Yeah, precisely. We'll look at some surprising trade-offs our ancestors made and maybe find some clues for better well-being in traditional diets around the world.
Sounds like a plan. Where should we start? Paleolithic.
Let's do it. We'll start way back there, then move through the agricultural revolution, check out medieval Europe, traditional diets in places like China, Japan, India, the Middle East.
And then bring it up to modern patterns. Mediterranean, keto, Atkins, heart-healthy stuff.
And we'll even tackle some common diet myths at the end. So, yeah, buckle up. Let's start with the Paleolithic era, the hunter-gatherers.
Right. And the first thing to grasp is there wasn't one single paleo diet. That idea we have today. It's a modern invention, mostly.
Okay, so what was it like then?
It was incredibly diverse. These were nomadic people. What they ate depended entirely on where they were and what time of year it was.
Makes sense. Tundra versus desert versus coastline. Totally different food available.
Exactly. Think Arctic hunters eating lots of fatty animals versus, say, groups in tropical forests relying more on plants and maybe smaller game or insects. Or coastal groups eating tons of fish and shellfish. It varied hugely. Seasonality was also massive.
So adaptability was key. They ate what they could find, basically.
Pretty much. Resourcefulness and local environment dictated everything.
There wasn't a grocery list.
Okay, so forget the idea of a single caveman diet.
Yeah.
Then comes this absolutely massive change. The Neolithic Revolution, farming, around 10,000 years ago. Yeah, that's the time frame. And this is, well, arguably the biggest dietary shift in human history. People started settling down, domesticating plants.
Wheat, barley, rice, maize, millet, those staples we still rely on.
Exactly those. And later, domesticating animals too. Now, this did lead to a more plentiful and, crucially, a more stable calorie supply.
Which allowed populations to grow, right? Cities, societies, all that stems from having reliable food.
It does. It's fundamental. And this is but that stability came at a cost, a significant cost in terms of dietary diversity.
Okay. So instead of eating, dozens of different wild plants and animals throughout the year,
They started relying very heavily on just one or two staple grains. Think wheat bread, day in, day out, or rice porridge, meal after meal.
that sounds incredibly monotonous compared to what came before.
It was. And the evidence from skeletons from bioarchaeology really paints a picture of this trade-off.
What does it show?
Well, compared to the hunter-gatherers before them, these early farmers actually got shorter. Their bones show more signs of malnutrition.
Like what specifically?
Things like iron deficiency, anemia become much more common. And dental health takes a nosedive, lots more cavities and gum disease.
Wow. So more calories overall, maybe, but less nutritious calories?
Precisely. One anthropologist called it a grim picture. More tooth decay, likely from all the starchy grains, frequent nutrient deficiencies, iron, zinc.
And living close to animals brought new diseases too, didn't it?
Yes, that's another factor. New infectious diseases popped up. Isotopic analysis, looking at the chemical signatures in bones, confirms this pattern. Iron deficiency, developmental delays, people literally shrank in stature on average.
So it was a trade-off. Individual health arguably got worse, at least initially.
In exchange for food security and the ability to support larger populations.
Yeah.
Protein intake likely dropped. Fewer vitamin-rich wild foods were eaten.
And lifespan, did that improve?
Probably not initially. Average lifespan likely remained low, maybe 30s or 40s. But now with the added burdens of malnutrition and hard agricultural labor alongside infections.
It's quite sobering. You think of farming as progress, but for the average person's health back then, maybe not so much.
In many ways, the health of early farmers was worse than their hunter-gatherer predecessors, even if child survival rates might have improved slightly due to more consistent food.
Did it get better eventually?
Yes. Over the long term, as agriculture developed, crop diversification increased, and farming techniques improved, diet quality did eventually start to rise again in many places. But that initial transition was rough, nutritionally speaking.
Okay, let's jump forward quite a bit. Medieval Europe, say 5th to 15th centuries. What's the dietary picture then? I imagine huge differences based on class.
Absolutely. Feudal economics, seasonality, religious rules, they all shaped what people ate. For the vast majority, the peasants, the lower classes, it was dominated by cheap plant foods.
So grains again?
Oh, yes. Grains were king. Bread, porridges, gruels made from barley, rye, oats mostly. These were the absolute staples, plus whatever vegetables and legumes they could grow or find.
How much grain are we talking?
A lot. Cereal grains became even more central than in early agriculture. By the high Middle Ages, maybe 3/4 of their calories came from grains.
Wow.
Bread consumption could be enormous. We have records suggesting some adults ate like 1 to 1.5 kilograms. That's 2 to 3 pounds of bread a day.
Good grief. What else was on the plate besides bread?
Usually a simple stew called pottage. Basically, whatever vegetables, peas, or beans were around, boiled up. Maybe a bit of cheese or some saltfish sometimes.
And then meat.
A luxury for the poor. Maybe some bacon fat for flavoring, or awful organ meats on very special occasions. The nobility, of course, that was different.
Right. They had the fresh meat, the game, the fish.
And spices, which were incredibly expensive. And bread made from finer wheat, not the coarse rye or barley bread the peasants ate.
And didn't religion, like the Catholic Church's rules, play a big part? Fasting days and all that?
A huge part. Lent, Fridays, numerous other days.
Yeah.
Meat from land animals was forbidden. So people had to rely more on fish if they could get it, and legumes.
So that would have reduced meat intake quite a bit over the year.
Definitely. Some estimates suggest people might have been fasting or partially fasting for up to half the year, which, probably did cut down on saturated fat and overall calories instantly.
But even with all that bread, was this diet actually good, nutritionally?
Often marginal, especially for the poor. Iron deficiency anemia was still very common, particularly for women, contributing to high mortality rates.
And variety was still an issue.
Big time. Very monotonous. Potential for vitamin deficiencies was high, especially things like scurvy in winter, when fresh greens weren't available.
Although some historians argue they had enough food, just boring food.
In good years, in productive areas, yes. Some argue it was monotonous but abundant. Hard-working peasants might have needed thousands of calories, just coming from bread, ale, and pottage.
What about things like heart disease?
Likely less common than today. Lifespans were shorter, obviously, and overall animal fat intake for the majority was low, but dental problems.
Worse than the Stone Age, I bet. With all that porridge and bread.
Yep, more cavities again. Those are the refined carbs of the era, in a way. Medieval physicians preached moderation, but for most people it just came down to what food was actually available.
Okay, let's shift continents. How about traditional China before major modernization? What did that diet look like?
It had a very clear structure based on fan, which means grains or starchy staples, and kai, the accompanying dishes.
Fan and kai. Okay.
So the fan was the bulk of the calories, usually steamed white rice in the south, or things like wheat bread or noodles in the north.
And the kai.
That would be vegetables mostly. Stir-fried or boiled. Leafy greens like bok choy, cabbage, spinach were common. Often a small amount of meat or tofu was added, mostly for flavor rather than being the centerpiece.
So differences between North and South?
Yeah, generally South China had more fish and seafood, maybe a bit more pork used sparingly. North China relied more on wheat products, less seafood.
Where did they get their protein primarily?
Legumes were crucial, especially soybeans. Tofu is ancient in China, over 2,000 years old. Soy milk, tempeh, fermented bean pastes, all important sources of plant protein.
And meat.
Used sparingly by most people because of cost. Pork, chicken, duck, fish, usually just small amounts mixed with lots of vegetables. Only the wealthy ate large portions regularly.
What about dairy?
Historically, almost none. Lactose intolerance is very common in East Asia. We got calcium from leafy greens, nuts, seeds, and especially tofu made with calcium sulfate.
And fats.
Cooking fat was used minimally, usually plant oils like rapeseed or soy oil, sometimes a little pork lard for flavor. So overall, it was a largely plant-based, high-fiber, relatively low-fat diet.
And the health outcomes associated with that?
Traditionally, in rural areas before widespread Western influence, this diet was associated with very low rates of obesity, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes.
Interesting. Any big studies on this?
Yes. The famous China-Cornell-Oxford project in the 70s and 80s found that populations eating primarily plant-based diets with very little animal fat had exceptionally low rates of heart disease and certain cancers.
And modern research supports this.
It does. Studies looking at adherence to a traditional Chinese pattern rice, veggies, fish, tend to find it's correlated with lower obesity risk compared to more westernized eating patterns.
Were there any downsides historically?
The main risk was undernutrition, especially during times of famine or hardship, which were unfortunately common. But in normal times, rice and vegetables provided a relatively healthy, low-calorie way to feed a huge population.
Any cultural influences?
Yeah, definitely. Taoist and Buddhist ideas about moderation, sometimes vegetarianism or fasting, and traditional Chinese medicine's concept of food as medicine, emphasizing balance and variety.
Okay, fascinating. Now let's hop over to Japan, another place famed for longevity. What's the story with their traditional diet?
The traditional Japanese diet is often held up as one of the healthiest in the world, and yeah, it's strongly linked to their impressive longevity.
What's the core of it?
Polished white rice, eaten daily, is the absolute staple. Alongside that, a huge array of vegetables, both land vegetables like leafy greens and root veggies, and crucially, sea vegetables.
Seaweed.
See? Right. Kombu, nori, wakame.
Exactly. Packed with minerals. Then you have soy products, again, tofu, miso for soup, natto, fermented soybeans, soy sauce, kefir protein, and umami flavor.
And fish.
Lots of fish and seafood, oily fish like mackerel and sardines, rich in omega-3s, but also shellfish, even sea urchin. It's a major protein source.
What about meat, like beef or pork?
Historically very scarce. Buddhist influences and even official bans meant meat from four-legged animals wasn't common until the late 19th century. For centuries, animal protein came mostly from fish, maybe some poultry or wild game.
So nutritionally, what does that profile look like? Very high in complex carbs and fiber from the rice and vegetables. Moderate protein, mostly from fish and soy. And quite low in total fat, especially saturated fat.
And the way they eat. Meal structure.
Very characteristic. Often follows the H.E. Sunsai principle, one soup, three sides. So rice, miso soup, and three small dishes, maybe some pickles, simmered vegetables, grilled fish, balanced and light.
And portion sizes. I've heard about harahachibu.
Yes, especially in Okinawa. It means eat until you're 80% full. It's a cultural practice promoting mild calorie restriction. Studies on Okinawan elders found they consumed about 11% fewer calories than their estimated needs.
And the health results are pretty amazing, right?
Absolutely striking. Japan has among the highest life expectancies globally.
Yeah.
Very low rates of ischemic heart disease attributed to the low saturated fat, high omega-3s from fish.
Low heart attack rates.
Yeah, very low mortality from coronary heart disease, thought to be linked to low obesity, low red meat intake, high fish, soy, and also green tea consumption.
Okinawa especially, right? The blue zone.
Okinawa is the poster child. Traditionally, incredibly high numbers of centenarians. Their diet was even more distinct. Very high in purple sweet potatoes, lots of greens, soy, some fish, extremely low fat. Elderly Okinawans had remarkably low cholesterol and very clean arteries.
So the traditional Japanese diet really shows you can have great health and longevity on a high-carb, moderate protein, low-fat diet, as long as the foods are mostly whole and unprocessed.
Exactly. Rich in plants, rich in marine foods, modest lean protein, fresh, seasonal. It shares some features with the Mediterranean diet in that respect. A powerful model for healthy aging. Moderating salt is also important, though. Historically, stroke rates were higher, partly due to high salt intake from things like soy sauce and pickles.
Right. Okay, let's travel south to India. Such a vast and diverse country, the diets must vary a lot.
Immensely diverse, yes. But there are common threads. Traditional Indian cuisine is largely plant-forward. Grains, legumes, dal, vegetables, and of course, an amazing array of spices are central. Animal products tend to play a smaller role than in many Western diets.
Is there a typical meal structure?
The thali is a great example. It's a platter with multiple small bowls, offering a variety of dishes in one meal, maybe some rice, roti, flatbread, a couple of different dals or vegetable curries, yogurt, a pickle. It encourages balance.
And vegetarianism is quite common, isn't it?
Very significant, yes, due to religious and cultural factors. Hinduism, Jainism, some Buddhist traditions often advocate vegetarianism, especially avoiding beef.
So where does the protein come from in those vegetarian diets?
Legumes are absolutely key. Dal, lentils, beans, peas are staples across the country. They're often combined with grains like rice or roti, which creates a complete protein. Dairy is also important. Milk, ghee, clarified butter, yogurt, dahi, paneer, cheese.
And the spices, more than just flavor.
Definitely. In Ayurveda, India's traditional medicine system, spices like turmeric, ginger, cumin, coriander are used for their health properties. Turmeric, for instance, is known for its anti-inflammatory effects. They add antioxidants too.
Cooking methods. Fats.
Vegetable oils or ghee are common. Daily cooking often involves roasting, boiling, sautéing. Deep frying is more for special snacks or treats, though its use has increased with modernization.
What about health outcomes historically?
In traditional rural settings with lots of physical labor, obesity was less common. But there were, and still are, nutritional challenges, undernutrition in some areas, iron deficiency anemia, especially among women and children, and vitamin B12 deficiency can be a concern for strict vegetarians who don't supplement or consume fortified foods.
But overall, is the traditional pattern considered healthy?
In many ways, yes. It's rich in plant nutrients, fiber, relatively low in red meat. Studies on vegetarian Indians often show lower LDL cholesterol and reduced risk of heart disease compared to meat eaters.
But modernization has changed things.
Significantly, increased consumption of refined grains, sugar, fried foods, and processed snacks has led to rising rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease, sometimes creating a double burden where undernutrition and obesity-related diseases coexist in the population.
So the traditional whole food pattern is key.
Exactly. A traditional thali based on whole grains, dal, plenty of vegetables, moderate fruit, maybe some yogurt, and minimal fried foods or sweets can be incredibly healthy. It's the shift towards more processed ingredients that causes problems.
Got it. One more historical stop, the ancient Middle East, the cradle of agriculture in many ways. What were diets like there, say, in antiquity?
You see a pattern rich in whole grains, fruits, legumes, and healthy fats. Think unleavened breads or porridges from wheat and barley. Lots of fruits like figs, dates, grapes, pomegranates. Olive oil was absolutely central as the primary fat source.
And vegetables, protein.
Wild greens, legumes like lentils and chickpeas were staples. Meat, usually lamb, goat, poultry was eaten, but often sparingly, more by the wealthy or for special feasts. For many, the diet was largely plant-based, maybe with fish in coastal regions.
Dairy, too.
Yes, yogurt and cheese from goats and sheep's milk were common.
Were there religious or cultural influences?
Absolutely. Jewish dietary laws, kosher, later Islamic laws, halal, shaped food choices, restrictions on pork, for example. Cultural practices often emphasized hospitality, but also moderation.
Nutritionally, what stands out?
Very high in fiber, lots of antioxidants from the fruits, nuts like walnuts and almonds, vegetables, and olive oil itself. The olive oil provided loads of monounsaturated fat, which even then was likely recognized as beneficial. Herbs and spices added flavor and micronutrients.
This sounds incredibly familiar, like the original Mediterranean diet.
Exactly. This is essentially the blueprint for the modern Mediterranean diet. Mostly vegetarian meals built around grains, legumes, olive oil, seasonal vegetables, and fruits. Meat was an occasional addition for most.
Health implications.
This pattern is strongly associated with good cardiovascular health in modern studies. While atherosclerosis likely existed even then, it was probably far less common than today. The high fiber, the unsaturated fats, the antioxidants, all protective. It likely contributed to relatively robust health for the time.
So a prototype for modern heart-healthy eating, really.
Absolutely. Wholesome plant foods, moderate fish and dairy, olive oil is the main fat, modest meat intake shaped by environment and culture. It illustrates how diets adapted to what the Fertile Crescent could provide, and it turned out to be a very healthy adaptation.
This historical tour has been fantastic. It really highlights how much environment, technology like farming, culture, and economics shape what's on our plates, and how certain patterns, especially those centered on whole plant foods, keep emerging as beneficial.
It's striking, isn't it? Now, bringing it to the present day, we're bombarded with diet information, new trends, scientific studies.
It's overwhelming. Let's try to make sense of some key modern dietary patterns, starting with the one we just touched upon, the Mediterranean diet, as it's understood today.
Right. So the modern Mediterranean diet is really modeled on the eating patterns observed in places like Greece and southern Italy back in the mid-20th century, around the time researchers like Ansel Keys started studying them.
And the key features?
It emphasizes plant foods. Lots of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. Olive oil is the principal fat. Fish and seafood are eaten regularly, poultry and dairy, like cheese and yogurt, in moderation. Red meat and sweets are consumed infrequently. Moderate wine consumption, usually with meals, is also traditional in some regions.
Nutritionally, what's the profile?
Moderate in total fat, but importantly, it's low in saturated fat and high in monounsaturated fat from olive oil, and polyunsaturated fats, including omega-3s from fish and nuts. It's packed with fiber, vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants from all the plant foods.
And the health evidence. Is it really as good as people say?
The evidence is incredibly strong. It's one of those studied dietary patterns, and the results are consistently positive. It started with observational studies like the 7-country study linking it to lower heart disease rates.
But we have intervention trials now too, right? Like
Yeah.
pre-dimed.
Exactly. The PREDIME trial was a landmark study showing that people at high cardiovascular risk who adopted a Mediterranean diet, supplemented with extra virgin olive oil or nuts, had about a 30% lower risk of major cardiovascular events compared to a control group advised to eat a low-fat diet.
30% lower risk, that's huge.
It is. And meta-analyses combining results from many studies consistently show lower all-cause mortality. People just live longer and reduced risk of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, even certain cancers and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's.
Why is it so beneficial? What are the mechanisms?
It's likely a combination of factors. The high fiber helps with blood sugar control and gut health. The healthy fats improve cholesterol profiles. The low glycemic load helps manage insulin. Omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. The antioxidants combat oxidative stress. Plus, it's generally satiating, which can help with weight management.
It seems pretty sustainable, too, compared to more restrictive diets.
That's a key advantage. It's flexible, adaptable, focuses on delicious whole foods rather than extreme deprivation. Major health organizations worldwide recommend it. It consistently ranks as the #1 overall diet by U.S. News & World Report.
Any caveats?
Well, the true traditional Mediterranean lifestyle also included regular physical activity and strong social connections, which definitely contribute to health. But the dietary pattern itself is demonstrably powerful. It's often called the gold standard for a reason.
Okay, so Mediterranean gets a big thumbs up. What about the Okinawan diet? We mentioned its connection to longevity. Is it something people follow today?
The traditional Okinawan diet, the one associated with extreme longevity, is less common among younger Okinawans now, who've adopted more Western habits, unfortunately.
And their health has suffered as a result.
Yes, rates of chronic diseases have increased, and their longevity advantage has eroded somewhat. But the principles of that traditional diet are still incredibly relevant.
Remind us of those key principles.
Very high intake of vegetables, especially purple sweet potatoes, historically. Lots of soy foods, some fish, very little meat or dairy. Extremely low in fat, particularly saturated fat. High in fiber and antioxidants. And that cultural practice of calorie moderation, harahachibu.
So it's another example of a mostly plant-based, whole food diet promoting long life.
Absolutely. Yeah. It shows that high protein, especially from red meat, isn't necessary for longevity. It's a low-calorie but nutrient-dense approach. The Okinawan experience is a cornerstone of the Blue Zone's research into longevity hotspots.
Can we apply Okinawan principles easily?
Many of them, yes.
Wow.
Eat lots of colorful vegetables. Get sufficient protein from plant sources like soy or from fish. Limit calories somewhat. Minimize meat and dairy. Choose healthy fats. Practice portion control. It shares many positive features with the Mediterranean diet.
Okay, now let's switch gears dramatically. The ketogenic diet, or keto. Very popular, very controversial. What's the deal?
Right, keto is a very specific approach. It's extremely low in carbohydrates, usually under 50 grams a day, often under 20, very high in fat, around 70–75% of calories, and moderate in protein.
And the goal is to get into ketosis.
Exactly. By drastically restricting carbs, you force the body to switch from burning glucose for fuel to burning fat and producing ketones, which the brain and body can then use for energy.
What kinds of foods does that involve?
Lots of fatty fish, eggs, meat, full-fat dairy, butter, oils, nuts, seeds, and low-carb vegetables like leafy greens, broccoli, cauliflower. You have to eliminate grains, sugar, most fruits, beans, root vegetables.
It originated as a medical diet, didn't it?
Yes, back in the 1920s for treating epilepsy in children, where it can be very effective. Its recent surge in popularity is mostly for weight loss and managing type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance.
Does it work for weight loss?
Short term, yes, it can be quite effective. Studies often show equal or sometimes greater weight loss compared to low-fat diets in the first 6–12 months. It often reduces hunger and cravings for people, too.
What about other health markers?
It can dramatically lower triglycerides and often raises HDL, good cholesterol. It's very effective at lowering blood sugar and HbA1c levels in people with type 2 diabetes.
Okay, sounds good so far. What are the downsides or concerns?
There are several. Firstly, it significantly raises LDL, bad cholesterol, in a substantial portion of people, which is a concern for long-term heart health.
Okay. What else?
Nutrient deficiencies are a risk because you're cutting out entire food groups, fiber, potassium, magnesium, some B vitamins. Vitamin C can be low if not carefully planned. The initial keto flu, fatigue, headache, nausea is common.
Are there longer-term worries?
Long-term data, 2 years, is still limited. There are potential concerns about effects on the liver, kidneys, including kidney stones, thyroid function, and hormone levels. It's contraindicated for certain medical conditions. The type of fat eaten is also critical. A keto diet high in processed meats and saturated fats is very different from one based on avocados, nuts, and olive oil.
And sustainability. Is it easy to stick to?
That's a major challenge. It's very restrictive, can be socially isolating, and requires constant vigilance. Many find it difficult to maintain long term, and weight regain after stopping is common.
So the verdict on keto.
It could be a useful therapeutic tool for specific conditions like epilepsy and an effective short-term strategy for weight loss or blood sugar control for some people, ideally under guidance. But long-term safety and sustainability are questionable for the general population. Medical supervision is recommended, especially for longer periods. It's not a magic bullet, and careful planning is essential.
Okay. What about the Atkins diet, another famous low-carb diet? How does it compare to keto?
Atkins is similar in principle, reducing carbs to promote fat burning, but it's generally less extreme than keto, especially in its later phases.
How so?
Atkins starts with a very low-carb induction phase, similar to keto, but then it gradually increases carb intake through subsequent phases, allowing for more variety. Long-term Atkins might involve 50 to 100 grams of carbs, sometimes more, including things like berries, nuts, seeds, more vegetables, even some whole grains eventually.
So more flexible than strict keto.
Generally, yes. The later phases make it potentially easier to sustain long-term. It emphasizes choosing healthy fats and proteins and lots of non-starchy vegetables throughout.
What does the research say about Atkins?
Clinical trials show Atkins is effective for weight loss, often comparable or slightly better than low-fat diets in the first 6-12 months. It also tends to improve triglycerides and HDL cholesterol. Effects on LDL cholesterol have been more variable in studies, but often not significantly increased on average, unlike sometimes seen with keto. Some long-term studies suggest it's as safe and effective as conventional diets over a year or two.
So maybe a more moderate, sustainable, low-carb approach for some.
Potentially. It transitions towards a more balanced, whole food, lower-ish carb diet in the long run, rather than permanent ketosis. Food quality still matters. Of course, focusing on unprocessed foods is key. Like keto, it helped challenge the old all fat is bad, all carbs are good dogma.
Right. Now let's talk about heart-healthy diets. It's a broad category, isn't it? What are the main players here?
It is broad, but the core principles are consistent. Emphasize fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, lean protein like fish and poultry, and healthy fats, while limiting saturated and trans fats, cholesterol, sodium, red meat, and added sugars.
The DASH diet often comes up. What's that?
DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It was specifically designed to lower blood pressure. It's rich in fruits, vegetables, low-fat dairy, whole grains, poultry, fish, and nuts. It limits red meat, sweets, and sugary drinks. It's high in potassium, magnesium, and calcium, which help regulate blood pressure.
And it works.
Very well. Studies show DASH significantly lowers blood pressure, sometimes as much as medication. It also lowers LDL cholesterol and improves overall diet quality. It's highly recommended by major health organizations, not just for hypertension, but for general heart health. It's quite flexible, too.
What about very low-fat diets, like the Ornish diet?
That's on the other extreme from keto or Atkins. The Ornish diet is an extremely low-fat, around 10% of calories, whole food vegetarian diet, lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, non-fat dairy, egg whites, no meat, no oils, no nuts, no avocados.
That sounds really restrictive.
It is very hard to follow long-term for most people. However, Dr. Ornish's research, combining this diet with intensive lifestyle changes like exercise, stress management, and social support, showed it could actually reverse coronary artery disease progression in some patients in small trials. It's usually considered only for highly motivated individuals with severe heart disease under supervision.
Any other notable heart-healthy approaches?
The portfolio diet is interesting. It's vegetarian and focuses on combining specific cholesterol-lowering foods. Plant sterols, found in fortified margarines, viscous fiber from oats, barley, psyllium, soy protein, and nuts, like almonds. Studies show it can lower LDL cholesterol by nearly 30%, similar to early statins.
So the common theme across these heart-healthy diets seems to be plants.
Lots of plants, yes. Rich in whole plant foods, low in harmful fats, saturated and trans, low in refined carbs and added sugars. They tend to be naturally lower in sodium and higher in potassium. Mediterranean and DASH are often seen as the most practical and well-evidenced templates. Well-planned vegetarian and vegan diets also fit here.
And the overall benefits.
Strong evidence for reducing the risk of heart attack, stroke, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and certain cancers. They are generally anti-inflammatory and support a healthy gut microbiome. Basically, focusing on whole, minimally processed foods, mostly plants, with lean protein and healthy fats is the foundation for long-term cardiovascular and overall health.
This is great. We've covered so much ground. Before we wrap up, let's quickly tackle a few common diet myths that keep popping up. First one, is keto dangerous long term? What's the quick take?
The reality is complex. Short-term, it can be safe and effective for some. Long-term data is limited. It can raise LDL cholesterol in many people, which is a risk factor. Nutrient deficiencies and side effects are possible. So, dangerous is probably too strong a word universally, but indefinite long-term use without monitoring carries potential risks and challenges. It depends heavily on the individual and how the diet is constructed.
Okay. Myth 2. Is the Mediterranean diet just hype?
Definitely not just hype. The evidence is overwhelming and consistent from decades of research, including large intervention trials. It's linked to lower mortality and lower rates of many major chronic diseases. It's not just pasta and pizza. It's a pattern based on whole foods. Balanced, flexible, sustainable, and proven. Gold standard stuff.
Right. And the last one, is plant-based automatically better?
Not automatically, no. Quality's everything. A diet of vegan junk food fries, sugary drinks, refined grains is still junk food. Healthful plant-based diets, whole fruits, veggies, legumes, nuts, whole grains, are strongly linked to better health outcomes than diets high in animal products and diets high in unhealthful plant foods. So plant-centric focusing on whole foods is generally better, but just having the plant-based label doesn't guarantee health. You still need nutritional awareness, especially for nutrients like B12 in vegan diets.
Excellent clarifications. So thinking back over this entire journey, from Paleolithic times to modern diet wars, it's clear our eating has been this incredible story shaped by environment, technology, culture, science.
It really has. And what's fascinating is how certain patterns keep emerging as beneficial, hasn't it? Diets rich in whole plant foods, lean proteins, healthy fats. Whether we look at traditional diets that supported longevity or modern evidence-based recommendations like the Mediterranean approach, those core principles seem pretty consistent.
Yeah, it's like, despite all the fads and confusion today, understanding our history gives us perspective. We see the trade-offs, like the shift to agriculture, but also the enduring wisdom in some of these long-standing traditions.
So what's the takeaway for listeners, you think? For you, this probably comes back to those core principles, right? Focusing on whole, unprocessed foods as much as possible. Getting a good balance of nutrients. Recognizing the power of plant foods in the diet.
Definitely. And maybe here's a final thought to chew on. In this world of endless new diet trends, maybe the best insights aren't from the latest fad, but from looking back. Looking at the diets that sustained populations healthily for generations, what lessons from those traditional ways of eating, maybe the portion control of Okinawa, the plant focus of the Mediterranean, the balance of a traditional thali, could we incorporate into our own lives?
That's a great question to reflect on. Food for thought. Quite literally.
Absolutely. Well, if you found this deep dive into how we eat and how we used to eat interesting, please share it with someone you think might enjoy it too.
And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that bell. If you're listening on Substack or your podcast app, make sure you hit subscribe so you catch our next deep dive.
Until then, keep hacking your health.
Keep exploring, keep learning.